Hello, everybody. This is Shawn Harwell. You are listening once again to the Never Heard of It podcast. This is episode 50, and I am joined, as always, today, just like yesterday, by my main man,
Craig Moorhead.
Craig, how are you?
I'm good, Shawn. Hey, happy 50th episode. We've come a long way.
We have come a long way, I guess. I think we have. I think we're getting better at this. Well, we're going to talk about a little bit about why we chose the movie today, and since it is the 50th episode. But if you're just joining us, this is the podcast where we talk about the movies that have at least fallen through our cracks, and probably some of yours as well. You can find us online, neverheardpodcast.com. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. It's always nice to leave a review if you want. That helps people find the show. And at our website, you can find links to all our social outlets and electrical outlets and shopping outlets.
I like those outlets. Electrical outlets? Did we say that?
I did, yeah.
Good.
I think those are the only 3 outlets that exist.
Mm-hmm.
Craig.
Yeah.
Should we talk about this movie?
I can't wait to talk about this movie, Shawn. Let's do it.
There is a lot to talk about. The movie we're talking about is The Perfect Host. This is from 2010. It was directed by
Nick Tomney.
Nick Tomney. I like that name.
Yeah.
Written by Nick Tomney and Krishna Jones, starring David Hyde Pierce, Clayne Crawford, Nathaniel Parker, and a host of other folks.
Helen Reddy, no doubt.
Helen Reddy.
I'd like to throw that out there. Yeah.
Megan Perry, who I believe was in Buffy the Vampire Slayer, the TV series, which I'd never watched, so I'm the last person who should be talking about that, but here we are.
Mm-hmm.
Now, why did we choose The Perfect Host this time? Well, Craig and I were discussing what we should do for this episode since, it's 50, whatever. I don't know why I had never even thought to do this, but I was like, hey, I should just Google best movies you've never heard of. What will that pull up? And needless to say, I found a slew of lists online. Obviously, we're a very list-obsessed culture, and there was no shortage of lists. However, man, I was really surprised that there was a lack of consensus. And maybe I shouldn't be because, this is America. People have different tastes, obviously. But it was all across the board. You know, there were a lot of lists that had things like history of violence. I saw a list that had The Big Lebowski. A lot of movies that I think anybody in our audience will easily have, heard of and seen.
And have the posters on their wall. Yeah.
Exactly. There were other lists that had plenty of obscure, great sounding things that I had never heard of, but they were the only list I could find that had those movies. Mm-hmm. So what I did was, let's find some consensus, just a little bit, just give us something. Is there a movie or a couple movies that show up on maybe 2 or 3 of these lists? That was literally what I was looking for, because that's how across the board it was. And so there were a couple that were, the movie Moon was on there several times. Duncan Jones, Sam Rockwell, great sci-fi movie if you haven't seen it. I feel like a lot of you probably have. So I was like, well, okay, we could watch that again, but let's see what else is on there. Primer. Sundance hit. I've seen it. It's been a long time. That was on a bunch of lists. Surprisingly, Craig, and I would never have guessed this, even though I've seen it, the movie Risk Cutters, a love story, which stars Patrick Fugit and Shannon Shostaman. Is it Shostaman? How do you say your name? Shannon Shostaman from A Knight's Tale.
Yeah, that's fine.
You may remember.
Oh, it's Shannon.
The great Shea
Sossaman.
Wiggum.
Yeah, it's Sossaman.
Sossaman.
That's fine.
Yeah, it's a fun indie flick. And I remember it. I remember liking it. I was surprised it was on 5 of these lists. So there were things like that, and then we talked about maybe watching that. But then, of course, we're in the streaming age. We like to find things that you can watch if you've already got a subscription to a place like Netflix. And so that's how we kind of landed on this movie, The Perfect Host. Mm-hmm. I will say, we'll get into this, but if you want to really point the finger at anybody, Craig, the website realrundown.com, there was an article when I did my Google search that was the top 10 best movies you never heard of, written by David Godbey, I believe is how you say his name. Perfect Host, number 1 on his list.
Wow.
And then it also popped up on a list from an IMDb user who, good gracious, I think he's got over 300 movies on this list, a lot of horror stuff. Perfect Host was sitting at number 29. So, I mean, I think he maybe ranked these in order. I'm not positive. Could be a she. That said, they at least thought of it pretty early on when they were making the list, if it's on there at number 29, right?
Yeah.
And there's some great stuff on there, like Dogtooth, which I have seen and heard of, obviously. And that's a fantastic movie if you haven't seen it. So that's where we were going into this. Obviously, I think anybody that grew up with Cheers and Frasier should be a David Hyde Pierce fan. I am.
Indeed.
Did you watch this trailer before you sat down to check out the movie, Craig?
I didn't watch it just before. I definitely had seen the trailer. I was aware of the movie.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you were aware of the basic setup of this movie?
Yeah.
Okay, because I was not. And I will say, like, I thought, just given the fact that David Hyde Pierce was in this, given the fact that it looks to be fairly small and not well known, I thought we were in total, like, indie comedy, New York, Noah Baumbach, somewhere land like that. This is clearly not that kind of movie.
So you were not even ready for the genre that this was?
No, not even ready for the genre, and so that threw me for a bit of a loop. So let me give the synopsis right now from IMDb, and then we'll get into all of that.
Right on.
This movie, The Perfect Host from 2010, is about an on-the-run convict looking for temporary cover, finds himself at the house of a very colorful character, played by David Hyde Pierce. And that's a very general synopsis.
Yes, very spoiler-free.
Yes, and we are going to spoil this movie, as we spoil all movies, because that's what we do. When they say colorful character, that means David Hyde Pierce is kind of batshit insane. Right. And he has invented a whole host, no pun intended, imaginary people that are frequent party goers and dinner guests at his house.
Yes.
And boy, I did not know that. What did you think of this movie, Craig? Thoughts, and then we'll dive right in.
Well, you know, it's kind of a mixed bag. I did know that it was. Mm-hmm. I kind of knew what it was going in, only in as much as I knew that David Hyde Pierce was not what he seemed. As far as I knew, though, there was an actual party. I don't remember the trailer well, but it seemed to. I don't feel like the trailer gave away the fact that the people in the party were fake. Like, I seem to remember feeling like, oh, there's a party, and it's going to be like a party of cannibals or something. You know, like, I don't know, but...
It actually, I watched it today,
yeah,
and it does. It's the very last shot, I think, of the trailer is when David Hyde Pierce asks one of his imaginary guests to help lift this bank robber hostage that he's taken, and then you see the result is actually... just he doing it himself.
No one's there. Gotcha.
So, but it doesn't really, that's the only kind of clue you get that those people may not be real.
Right.
But it's certainly having seen the movie and then seeing that, I'm like, okay, they were definitely tipping their hand there at least.
Yeah.
But I can see how you would have seen that, forgotten about it, and then watching it 7 years later, just think, yeah, there's a party going on and there's conga dances happening while this guy is tied up in a chair. Like, that's the movie.
Right. Well, so how did you feel about it there, Shawn?
But I thought it was a great opening. I was completely on board. Mm-hmm. I loved the sort of pace of it. I think the shot selection is great. It's got a good rhythm to it. It's got Eagles of Death Metal tune blasting there at the opening, and it kind of helped set the pace.
Sure.
And then it took a left turn, and I kind of wished it had gone straight. And like I say, obviously you know what that left turn is now. I didn't see it coming at all, and it was hard for me to kind of get into that. And then I think once I started to accept that, it kind of takes another turn in the third act and the very end, which I also just found unsatisfying and a little confusing.
Right.
On a plot standpoint. So my takeaway from this movie is that these problems are, for me, are script problems.
Yeah.
I think there's ample evidence here to suggest that Nick Tomney is a very capable director. Mm-hmm. I like most of the performances. I believe they had a budget of $500,000 and less than 3 weeks to shoot this in Los Angeles.
Right.
And man, kudos to them for pulling that off and pulling it off, I think, with the level of execution that they did.
Agreed.
So for me, this is really a case of the story didn't quite take me to where I wanted it to go, and then left me. Ever since I've finished it, I've been questioning the whole thing, you know. And there's some things that I think don't quite hold water.
Agreed.
Why'd you do it? Do what? Steal? Why not earn it honestly? It doesn't matter to me. I'm just curious. There's always ways to earn money. Do you know about anything?
Well, let's start at the beginning then.
All right, let's do it.
You know, this is one of those movies where you kind of hit the ground running and you don't know exactly what's happened, but you a smart viewer, you can quickly pick up that this man, I believe, is named John Taylor. They call him Taylor a lot. So there was a while there I just thought his first name was Taylor.
Yeah.
John Taylor. He's robbed a bank. He appears to be at least very competently trying to take steps to get away with his crime. There's rubber gloves. There's a bicycle that's put in a dumpster, and then he gets in a car, and then, you know, he's traveling, and then it's within minutes you find out that his name is already on the news. They've got the car, they got the license plate. They more or less know who this guy is. He's also cut his foot. That makes me think of something like No Country for Old Men. Like, I love those scenes where somebody gets hurt. And he milks that limp through the entire movie, which I think is great. He's got to get basically off the streets of L.A. and find some place to bunker down until he can rendezvous with whatever he's supposed to be rendezvousing with.
Yes.
Which we'll get to because that plays heavily into the third act. He stops at a house, tries to get into, use the phone, take cover by lying to a woman. She doesn't buy it. He goes to the next house. Looks in the mailbox. There's a postcard from a woman named Julia who's in Sydney, and he uses that as an excuse to get inside David Hyde Pierce's character's house by saying, "Hey, I'm a friend of Julia's. I just got back into town or in the country. She told me so much about you." I believe he says he was mugged, but the airline lost his luggage. He's supposed to meet his cousin. She's not home. Can he just hang out and make some calls if you don't mind? And there's initial resistance. He's got a dinner party happening. Sorry, it's just not a great time. And then realizes, Julia would never forgive me if I let you walk away. Come on in. And so that's your basic setup, because that's where you're going to spend pretty much the bulk of the movie.
Mm-hmm.
How are you feeling about that setup?
I felt pretty good about all of that.
Yeah, I really think it's pretty damn strong.
Yeah, you're definitely in this bank robber's shoes and John Taylor's shoes. Mm-hmm. He seems to be doing things smartishly, but not too smart. So all that felt pretty good. And then, once you get in there, you kind of feel like, this is where you're going to be spending the rest of the movie. For me, going in knowing that David Hyde Pierce is not what he seems, but I don't know what he is, all that stuff plays pretty well.
Did you, obviously being a fan, did you get a sort of horror vibe from that setup? Does that work for you as a horror fan? Because this movie kind of traffics in that genre a little bit, right?
It definitely does. And I can't say that I felt like it was horror-ish then. I didn't have any evidence yet that it was horror-ish. If anything, it felt maybe Tarantino-ish.
Yes. That's what was a surprise to me, actually, was that kind of vibe and that style, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
It just felt like you kind of knew this guy was going from frying pan into fire, but you didn't know how, but you could just feel that that's what was going to happen. So it was always kind of between that and like an episode of Twilight Zone was where I was kind of feeling like it was going to be happening. But yeah. Right.
And see, I'm thinking through all this that, here we go. He's in this house. He's created a lie. Let's watch it unravel. And I think they do a pretty good job of making that feel somewhat natural and believable. There was at least 2 or 3 moments where I swear to God, my fingers are hovering over my keyboard. I start typing, what the hell? Like, didn't he say he was going to call somebody to make arrangements? Why are we spending 3 minutes? And David Hyde Pierce hasn't even brought up, oh, do you need to use the phone? And like immediately that happens on screen. He's like, oh, did you want to use the phone to make a call?
Right.
You know? Which this is another, like, I think it's a good choice, but it is a little weird that, I don't know, it's like 2010. It seems like nobody in this environment has a cell phone.
Right.
You know? Did you notice that?
Oh, yeah.
But, you know, I kind of like that. So there were a couple of those moments where, and to me, like, I was actually getting really interested in this movie because I thought, okay, he's gone into this house and he created this story. This is going to be one of those movies where the shit, it just continuously unravels for him. And how is he going to hang on to not getting caught? I mean, somewhat like, Attack at the Gas Station is a really absurd version of that, the movie that we talked about with Mary Ratliff. But something like Panic Room, say, you know, that came to mind, like something in that sort of Hitchcockian thriller mode, I guess.
Right.
Because, you know, there's a moment that's going to happen where David Hyde Pierce figures out this guy is not who he says he is, and he's not good. And I actually liked how that happened, which was just the radio was on in the background.
Yes. And
the radio, like a news report comes up about John, the bank robber. And David Hyde Pierce is like being David Hyde Pierce. Oh, what would did you enjoy Sydney? Did you always, or he's like talking about art or something, it's that very sort of like elitist kind of character that he's played, and like that sort of like upper class, annoying guy. And John's like, just shut up. And then finally, like, he just explodes, like, shut up. I was like, oh, thank God. Like, we can't spend another minute of this movie trying to like stretch out the ruse.
Yeah.
So I like how all that happened. And then let's talk about the transition then from that setup to Crazy Town. Trademark.
Nice.
It's not a trademark. Because I don't even remember how it happened now. Do you?
Well, yeah. So exactly. He shouts like that, and David Hyde Pierce is like, "Oh, actually, I don't."
He says, "You don't. I will not have you speak to me that way in my house." I mean, I remember that.
As I remember it, basically, John Taylor becomes, the aggressor.
Yes.
And then does he light up to smoke? And David Hyde Pierce says, "Don't smoke in here." And then he like takes a knife off the table or something and sort of threatens him with it. He's like, "Sit down." Or no, because
yes,
they hear that they hear the radio say that he's considered dangerous.
Right.
And now let me stop us there for just 1 second.
Yeah, please do.
So
because that's a very good point, because that's something I want to talk about too. Go ahead.
Okay. So 2 things. One, on the radio they're saying he is considered dangerous.
Very dangerous, I think.
But my feeling is, knowing now what his crime was, why do they consider him dangerous?
Yeah.
He wasn't even armed, was he?
Nope.
And then
that's a big problem.
Backing up from there, looking back on it, I kind of feel like, what was his plan of talking someone into letting him into their house? Like, knowing who he is now and what his aims were, how is that going to end? Well, it just seems like you'd rather like climb into a cardboard box somewhere than be around somebody that you don't know.
Or I think the opposite. I mean, here's where I think they tried to have their cake and eat it too a little bit with the script, by making John a sympathetic guy and by putting him in a place where whatever crime he's committed is being trumped tenfold by David Hyde Pierce's neurotic, psychopathic tendencies.
Yeah.
If I have robbed a bank and all I'm concerned about is getting away with it, as soon as you get inside that house, take the fucking upper hand and you take David Hyde Pierce hostage. Like, this is what happens. You're going to sit down, you're going to shut up, or I'm going to kill you until I'm ready to get out of here. Yeah. That didn't happen, I think, until the moment that David Hyde Pierce started saying, well, you can't talk to me that way. And then John did become the kind of aggressor. It's like, I've already made up my mind. I'm going to kill you, blah, 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 blah.
Right.
You're going to shut up until I tell you to, And like there were some of those ones like, okay, yeah, like here we go. Like again, like Panic Room, like something like that. Like this is like interesting. Like what is David Hyde Pierce going to do now? Because this guy has been outed as this violent criminal and he is behaving violently.
Right.
I think it's shortly after that, actually. I can't remember if Pierce turns a knife on John before he starts to get woozy from... He's been poisoning the wine. I mean, that's... Or doing something to the wine to make John basically pass out.
Right.
And so he's been doing that since the moment John walked in the house and he offered him a drink. But that is your sort of vehicle to get him to lose the upper hand in that situation.
Right.
And from that moment forward, David Hyde Pierce is kind of in control. And I think like it was weird to me too, because I felt like I never really saw that anger and aggression and that sort of violent side of John the rest of the movie.
Probably not until the very end.
Yeah.
Like the very, very end. But even that, like, and I guess that's the thing is at the point when he's doing that at the beginning of the movie, you feel like he is a bank robber. Like this is a career criminal. And I guess he sort of was, but...
Kind of. I mean, like it's a little vague, but yeah, he went to prison. We know that.
He definitely went to prison.
We find that out through flashback.
Right.
But those flashbacks neuter him, right? I mean, they do a little bit.
Right. Well, and that was one thing, coming up that we haven't gotten to quite yet, but
yeah,
I wanted him to be a bad bank robber. Like I wanted him to be a dangerous bank robber through the whole thing.
Yep.
And so so then when it started becoming that he did a bad thing for the right reasons, it was like, okay, I mean, I guess we got to switch it back to him a little bit. Like otherwise you kind of don't really care if he's being such a jerk. But
why? Let me ask you this though, Craig. Why couldn't that stuff come out in dialogue between him and David Hyde Pierce?
Why couldn't he have just said exactly what had happened already?
Tell him what had happened. Tell him why you robbed the bank. I mean, if you're trying to save your own life from this maniac. You mentioned Tarantino and like thinking of Reservoir Dogs, like, there's those really extended scenes of just dialogue, but they're riveting and like there's such like dread and fear involved with Michael Madsen doing his thing and like at any moment like he could kill this guy, this cop that they've captured. Like I kind of wanted some of that, like and I don't know, I don't know like that sort of like the torture porn world at all, or if this even veers into that category. I thought it might for a little while.
Right.
I don't think it really ever does, but I certainly wouldn't have mind them ramping up that sort of darker aspect of it in a way that's not tied to David Hyde Pierce's insanity.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, let's talk about him then, and like just like his version of crazy to me at times was a little silly.
Yes.
There was one moment where he's checking on the duck in the oven, and you sort of get the oven POV shot. It's like it's the cameras inside the oven looking out, and he's like poking. No, it looks beautiful, fantastic, or whatever. And I was like, that shot that felt like a different movie for a second there.
Yeah.
And I think that was a foreshadowing of like, oh, this is going to be a movie where this guy dances on a table with imaginary people, and you're seeing the actors in one shot, and in another shot you're seeing him just by himself. I don't know, like tonally that's a little hard for me to reconcile with the first 25 minutes of this movie.
I felt the same way. A lot of the beginning of that, where he's having conversations with people who aren't there, like that's fine. There was a part of me that kind of felt like I almost don't want to see the phony people. Like I almost want to just be with John and just be like, what's going on?
I mean, that would have been so uncomfortable and amazing, right?
Yeah, I mean, just
have to sit there with that. Yeah,
just to think of like David Hyde Pierce is like his whole character throughout the entire movie is interacting with people who aren't there. Like I just feel like that would have been really fascinating to watch. It could have been, and
he's good at that too. I mean, I do think those moments, even though tonally, like to me, it was a little big and broad. I think he obviously, I think, enjoyed playing this character. I mean, he really put a lot into it.
Absolutely.
It's fun to watch.
And I think the dancing bit on the table was one where I was like, okay, so we're kind of going into a much more comic tone, and yet I always feel like John was cast for a serious movie.
And yes, and delivered a serious performance,
Yeah.
I think, for the most part.
Yeah.
There's that one moment where I think, David Hyde Pierce is now imagined a full-on party where the room in the house is full of people. Mm-hmm. And he's like, is everybody enjoying themselves? And John is like, you just see him by himself and the room is empty. He's like, oh, I'm having a great time. I'm like, well, that's...
Yeah.
It's funny, it's a little cute, but it's, it's not the same. Again, like, that's not the dude I saw who was saying he was going to kill David Hyde Pierce unless, X and Y happen. So, yeah, like, to me, it just, I don't know. Like, when I say, like, it took a left turn where I went straight. Like, that to me is, I still wonder if there's a version of this movie where, like you're saying, you have David Hyde Pierce, and he does have this like mental condition, but you still play that straight. And
right.
What does that look like? And like, how does that actually fuel the sort of discomfort of the entire situation where it's not quite so easy to make up your mind which guy is, the lesser of two evils, I guess?
Yeah.
Because it's pretty evident early on that, David Hyde Pierce is not only crazy, he's a really bad guy. Like, he's got the serial killer notebook. And should we talk about that for a second? Because
well, yeah, because I was going to say,
they always have to have a notebook.
Yeah.
Well, and that's the thing, is like, that's where we'll get to the end where maybe it just like, I don't quite know what to make of it all. But
right.
Before you get there, he's showing John photos of, pages that are time stamped. This is what I do with my victims at midnight. They've got this, cut on them. And then by 3 a.m., they look like this. And then by 6 a.m., their throat's slit. Yeah. We should give a shout out to the fact that there's a Polaroid camera in this movie. Yeah. After talking about the fact that there's a horror movie built entirely around a Polaroid now coming out.
It's a 7-year-old movie, though. So most of the kids going to see Polaroid have no idea. This movie is maybe like a classic.
Yeah. For them, they'll be like, oh, that's that camera that was in.
Wow. People really did use those.
Yeah.
But yeah, he's got the notebook, which is interesting, I guess, and it's starting to sort of ratchet up a reason for John to be legitimately nervous, not just
for sure
feeling weird about this guy, but legitimately
fearful for his life.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so then the evening continues in this way. He shows John an 8mm film strip of himself.
What's in that 8mm film strip, Craig?
It appears to be David Hyde Pierce in some sort of makeup. He seems to be sitting on the side of his bathtub, and he seems to cut himself with a knife over and over and just be bleeding all over himself and like laughing. And the real David Hyde Pierce is watching this with John and laughing. And of course, John looks very nervous.
Well, and then he uses the knife on his tongue.
I wasn't sure if he was using it on his tongue or if he was actually like licking his blood off the knife.
Okay. Well, either way, I was like,
Right.
It doesn't look like he cut his tongue. So, yeah, maybe he was just licking it off. But it did kind of clue me into, like, okay, is this just, like, kabuki?
Sure. And then there's a lot of kabuki clues there in that little bit.
Yeah. And that obviously rears its head later on. I'm not saying that I figured out what the hell, like, his thing was. But, yeah. Let me ask you this.
Yeah.
We'll stay on the topic of DHP.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel like if you knew a little more about him in any way that would help? Because I found myself kind of thinking of somebody like Hannibal Lecter, right?
Sure.
Where, that's a sort of a very mannered, intelligent, certainly you would say kind of elitist serial killer.
Yeah.
He's just like into specific things. He's smart. Like, he reveals a lot about himself every time he opens his mouth in some ways.
Sure.
And I felt like a little more like fleshed out specificity to this guy would have helped kind of build, I think, in some ways, like a more frightening character. Because I didn't know. Like, I guess, like, he's into these things. And I was thinking, like, how does this guy make all this money? It's like, what is he, like, does he have a job? Because, like, he's got this really nice house. And he's obviously into very fine things.
Right.
And yet he's crazy. Like, he's a lunatic, He's imagining all these people. Is it something that he can just contain to his house? And, like, what is that? I don't know. So I found myself asking those questions, whereas I think they could have, like, helped me avoid doing that by, giving me some things to kind of sink my teeth into with that guy a little bit.
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, why would he choose to reveal this to this guy? Mm-hmm. I guess at the beginning he didn't choose to do that. He just told him, "I have guests coming over, so I need to get you out of here." And by the time the guy's there for the party, like, yeah, there's no leaving the house. So I guess it's not like he chose to bring him in and reveal it to him, but it does make you feel like if he doesn't have any idea that he's that nuts,
yeah,
then yeah, how would he function day to day? What does he do?
Mm-hmm.
Because he certainly seems like he's so matter of fact about it. Just doesn't seem like he'd be able to keep that under wraps.
Well, gosh, that's making me think that we should kind of fast forward a little bit, because we do find out exactly what he does for a day job, and that opens a whole other can of worms.
Well, I want to shorthand a couple of things. So throughout the entire thing, we've been flashing back to John and his girlfriend. Girlfriend seems to be sick. John, she needs treatments that are expensive. They don't have the money for it. She says, "You're not going to rob another bank," and he's like, "Well, maybe I will." And so we have
exactly like that.
Exactly like that. That was a perfect impression.
They also play chess in a bathtub.
Right. They play chess in the bathtub.
I question if that's ever happened before. Do you think anybody, like, I want to know couples out there.
Yeah.
You ever play chess in a bathtub together?
If one of your formative moments was talking about chess while bathing together, which honestly, as romantic as it seems in the movies, is terribly uncomfortable.
I think
most of the time, if you've ever tried it. So anyway, regardless of that, I guess it depends on what kind of bathtub you have. But that's a tangent we don't need to get into.
Yeah. Let's talk tubs.
I like American standards.
Okay.
Fiberglass.
I'm a Kohler guy. Yeah.
Okay. No. John is tied up. John is probably going to die at the hands of this madman, and then he challenges the madman to a game of chess. And that's when we flash back and we see that John knows how to play chess. And if John wins the game of chess, then he's let go. And so John wins the game of chess, and it's like, okay, you're free to go. And then this drove me nuts. This moment drove me nuts, and I feel like it's something to watch. If you're writing something, if you're creating something where you're thinking about character motivation for different stuff, like we're at a big moment in the movie, and John can walk out the door from this crazy lunatic, can walk out the door and never see him again. But then Warwick, David Hyde Pierce, starts talking about how, wow, you didn't even fight. You're not much of a fighter. You're nothing. You're just nothing. And for some reason, this gets under John's skin. For me, I didn't understand why that got under his skin at all. Like, I didn't feel like there were any scabs being pulled off that we saw earlier in the movie. Yeah. So, and John gets really mad, and so he goes over to the wall and he pulls a sword off the wall and stabs David Hyde Pierce with it, but it turns out to be a fake knife, which is fine. A little weird, but it's fine. But again, it's like, man, you could have walked out, but then he called you nothing, so you were going to murder him, and you're not a murderer.
I know.
So like all of that, the more the movie went on, the less it made sense. But then David Hyde Pierce like knocks him out after revealing that the knife wasn't real. And then, and I'll say this, for all the stuff that kind of wasn't adding up for me in this movie, the next scene and a half had, I guess I can't really say they were great twists, because eventually they sort of seemed like kind of weird. But at the moment, I was like, that was the last thing I expected to have happen. Which is that there's a bit where he's like in a tub and tied up, I think. But cut to, who is it? The old lady next door is calling on the phone because she sees somebody laying out. She sees like feet laying on the ground outside where there's a bunch of trash bags.
Looks like a dead body.
Yeah. Cut to John, his throat is slit. And then you see David Hyde Pierce like putting hhis slit throat picture in the book. And it's like, wait a second, like this movie still has like at least 20 minutes left. Like, did that really just happen? Like, did this movie just leave the rails? Because like that got me really excited. I was like, oh wow, like I didn't think that at all.
Yeah.
You take it from there, because then we have more reveals coming out as Fast and Furious.
Well, the first big reveal is that John is not dead.
Yes.
He wakes up, sits up, quickly kind of pieces together that all of his wounds are only makeup.
Very good makeup.
Thinking about it, maybe I can't pinpoint a single moment where I thought I saw something that would have drawn blood that David Hyde Pierce did to John. Maybe those moments were all happening off camera or in between time jumps, when John was passed out.
One of them I thought was because doesn't he hit the floor pretty hard when he's got the mask on?
Yeah, the creature from the Black Lagoon mask.
Yeah. Like, I feel like he kind of got bounced around a little bit, so I was like, oh, okay. He's got some moves. Like I didn't question it at all.
I didn't either. Yeah, I didn't question the cuts
totally
at all.
Yeah.
And then it was like, oh, okay. So he didn't kill him. He's a guy who just kidnaps people or, holds people hostage and pretends to kill them, but just applies makeup, which goes along, I guess, thematically with having an imaginary life of some kind, but
yeah,
is a weird thing to do because certainly, unless you only do this to people who do not want to go to the cops for their own personal reasons, that seems like it would come back to haunt you because obviously what they did was not legal. But anyway. Right. John quickly gets the hell out of there. I think we get our second big surprise when there's two detectives in the movie that we've kind of cut to off and on throughout that are kind of following and working the bank robbery case. And one of them talks to the neighbor. They have an ID on John. They show up at David Hyde Pierce's house, and ta-da! David Hyde Pierce is their superior. He himself is a lead detective. Mm-hmm. Which, again, nice surprise. I don't know how you do that job if you're that level of crazy. There was a moment in the movie where David Hyde Pierce is opening a bottle of medication, and instead of taking two, he takes one, and there's a conversation with some of the imaginary characters about that fact.
Right.
So maybe when his medication is regulated, he's under control. When it's not, he's not. Is he choosing to not be under control when he's having dinner parties? I don't know. That, to me, is still a puzzle that I have not pieced together completely.
I agree, and I feel like my biggest problem with that at the time, and again, in the moment, I was happy. I got that little jolt of like, well, that's different. That's, again, not what I expected.
Didn't see it coming.
But there was also the feeling that nothing else in the movie suggested that this was true. There's not that feeling of like, oh, that's why this was true of that, and there was this thing. I was like, I don't know, like if you're a cop, does your house have zero evidence of you being a cop?
I know. Or is that meticulous and well sort of like arranged and decorated and modern and looks expensive?
Sure.
I don't know. What are,
you can have good taste and everything, but sure. it just seems like somewhere you're going to have like a plaque or something, like something will, like a cop's house is not the same as my dumpy house, right? So I don't know.
I don't know. You do have those guns just laying around.
I do have a store of guns and all those fake badges.
Yes, and bodies.
Yeah.
But that was, I don't know, that like the whole cop story was kind of interesting to me. But you're sort of quickly finding out that they believe the bank teller was in on the robbery, and you're getting more flashbacks and finding out, hey, John's girlfriend was actually the bank teller. And when he went and robbed this bank, he specifically went up to her, and I don't remember, but I don't think we saw him ever pull a gun on her.
Right. She
just kind of hands over the money. And I have a bunch of problems with this as the son of a woman who worked as a bank teller for years and was robbed several times.
Really?
Yes.
We do a mini episode on that.
We could. I will say this, okay, about the whole thing. Tellers, they are not allowed to speak to one another after a robbery until the cops show, or I think even until maybe there's somebody else like within the bank or banking organization shows up, because of the problem of inside jobs, I think.
Right.
You know, and to corroborate stories. And also, I don't know, it just doesn't make sense to me. Like, why would she do this? Like, why would he not go in with a gun and at least try to sell the idea that it's an actual robbery? I mean, I know, like, my mom was robbed by a guy who came in with a wig and sunglasses, not unlike this dude, and he had a note that said, "Give me X amount of money, I have a gun." Mm-hmm. Bank tellers keep the note, because if you just write that you are armed, they can charge you with armed robbery, and that's a different level of felony.
Sure.
We don't even know that. So, I mean, it like, for all we saw, he was just like, "Hey, yeah, you know, what we talked about before, let's do it right now. Give me the money." And she's like, "Okay." It seems like they took no level of skill to pull that off.
Right.
It just seems like so immediate that would crumble. You know,
Right.
Somebody would have seen them together. I mean, I don't know. Like, why would you not go to a different teller? Like, go to a different teller and, like, Robert, you know?
Yeah. Well, and here's a guy who walks into a bank. I mean, I think you should probably be arrested if you walk into a bank with big fluffy hair under a hat with sunglasses on. You should probably just immediately have handcuffs put on yourself.
It raises flags. That is for sure.
Like, that was the thing. I started getting into that. I started, like, brainstorming, like, you know, how would you, like, why wouldn't you go to that bank for a while, like, have an account there or something, like, you know, watch people in there, and then try and kind of dress like the clientele and just blend in, you know? Like, why, like, going in like that, he looks like a clown. Like, no one else in there looks like he does.
Yeah, the guy that robbed my mom, actually, he got busted because when he came out to the parking lot, he took his wig and sunglasses off, and somebody in the parking lot was like, "That's weird," and wrote down their license plate number, and then walked over to the bank when the cops were there and like, "I have no idea what happened, but I saw this guy come out of there and take a wig and sunglasses off, and I wrote down his license plate," and they caught him like half an hour later. But it's still okay. So in the construction of this movie, she is double crossing John very clearly. Mm-hmm. So basically, she arranged it. She's not sick at all. She arranged it so that he would come in, rob the bank. She would give him the money. He would give the money to her, and then she was going on. She's the one that ID'd him and gave up his name so that he would be caught.
Right.
How on earth she still thinks that she would get away with the money? I just don't see it. I don't buy it. I don't believe it. Like, it doesn't add up to me.
Right.
You know?
Well, that's the thing. She doesn't trip the alarm, I think, or something.
Yeah.
Like, it needed to seem like she was straight up robbed. Like, they needed to, like, like, go a little further, exactly, for her to be the innocent party. But yeah, the fact that they didn't, and I mean, and honestly, like, the whole thing about him waiting so he gets a certain teller, I don't know. Just seemed like,
that's a dead giveaway. And it's like, it's a shame, because I'm still with you in thinking at the setup of this movie, this guy felt legit. Like, he seemed like a robber, and like he had done this before, and it didn't go down exactly as planned, but he's making steps to get away.
Yeah.
And then it just all kind of came crashing. I was like, oh no, like, he's not that smart. Neither is she. And they didn't do this thing right at all. And like, I don't know.
Well, to be fair though, I mean, much like your example with your mom, and like, I've certainly cut a lot of true crime stuff that involve bank robberies. I mean, to be fair, true to life, most bank robbers are not smart.
Idiots. Yeah.
They are really bad at what they do, and they get caught immediately. Like, this is not supposed to be Ocean's 11. No one said this guy was a genius, right? So, like, maybe there's a part of it that like, we both need to, like, take a step back and just say, okay, this is kind of how bank robberies work. Like, it's a couple of dumb people who think robbing a bank is a good idea.
Totally fine, but like, give me the ending of The Killing or something where, you know, they just don't get away with it because of some other circumstance, or just don't, like, if you're gonna have the girlfriend double cross, don't put her in the bank. Take the money and say sorry, you know.
Right, exactly.
Like, find some other way out of that where I'm not like spending 15 minutes after watching this movie, because this happens really quickly in the end here. Like, this is like literally all we get in like 4 or 5 minutes. And I'm just left like, wait a second.
Yeah.
What? Like, that doesn't add up to me, you know? So I had issues with that, obviously. And then, you know, while John is on the lam, like trying to track down whether or not his girlfriend is on the up and up, and whether their plans to meet at a rental car company at 9 o'clock in the morning and drive across the border together are actually going to go down, David Hyde Pierce is out with the other 2 detectives, and they're tailing the girlfriend.
Right.
Again, she seems oblivious to the fact that she would even be a suspect in this thing, even though
it's pretty obvious. Yeah.
I mean, clearly they had a relationship together. It just seems so hard that that wouldn't come about. Anyway, you get your sort of like parking garage scene, and you know, there's the cops split up, and you know, John has walked away with the bag of money and is heading out of the parking garage, and who's there? David Hyde Pierce. And he points the gun and says, you know, you can get away with this if you give me 80% of it or whatever.
Yeah, so what happens is he's like, oh, well, you know, give me all that money, I'll let you go. And then John, like, pops the trunk eventually, and then so he takes the bag of money, Warwick does, takes the bag of money, and then hands him a couple of stacks and says, that'll get you into Mexico, I guess.
Yeah.
And then John drives away. So Shawn.
Oh man, and we still haven't got.
Oh yeah, we're not even close to like letting this all around.
Yeah.
Shawn, so let me ask you this question. So let's say you are an insane police lieutenant.
Yeah.
You've tracked your quarry to a big parking garage where you know this is all gonna it's all gonna come together here. The girl's gonna meet up with the guy, or something's gonna happen.
Yep.
You're in a parking garage. There are a few exits and a few entrances. How do you choose the exact booth John is going to come to, and that your other like police cronies are not going to come anywhere near?
I thought that was a stretch. I mean, I can buy that maybe there's only one place open to get out of there, or that didn't bother me as much as he seemed to know that John was going to be there, or he was already there, or something like that. Or did he not?
He couldn't have known. Well, actually, I guess it didn't matter if he knew John was going to be in there or not. He just knew the money was going to be there.
Yeah.
Right? Because, I was thinking the same thing. It's like he didn't know John was going to take that car, but I guess it didn't matter.
But is that what he's after, though? I mean, is that his MO, is just to get money from...
Exactly. That's a whole other thing.
Yeah, because so what was he going to do if the girl just had the money, but the other 2 detectives are with him? Is he going to, like, somehow slip away and kill her and take the money? Or I don't know. Like, to me, it's still...
Well, because he tells the other detectives to go back to the station or something.
Yeah.
And so that means they're going to leave the parking garage.
Yeah, and they even say, like, you don't have a car. How are you going to... Oh, I've just got something local. I'll get back. Fine.
And so it's just like, I don't know how any of that plan works. At this point, I started to wonder, like, how much of this was brought about to, like, fix other things. Like, I always want to, like, I would love to see the draft that went into production. Mm-hmm. Before they did all the notes on it, what did that script look like?
Yeah,
and
again,
how did it come out
17 days of shooting. That's still a lot to do. And
oh man, that's a lot.
And like, this is a complicated story because, like, even then, after John is driven off into the sunset and David Hyde Pierce is like 180 grand richer or whatever, we move forward a little bit, and the other detective gets a letter in the mail, stamps from Mexico, and it's one of the Polaroids that David Hyde Pierce took of himself and John when John was held hostage. I don't remember John taking that picture at all.
I have no idea how he would have gotten that.
Yeah, which would have been nice to see him grab that, I think, and pocket it.
Right.
If you're going to use that again. The detective, seems to immediately then go to David Hyde Pierce and starts pressuring him and interviewing him and trying to make sense of it all. Which, to me, I didn't buy that either. Like, that to me it feels like immediately you go to, like, internal affairs or whatever, because
sure,
he seems to not believe David Hyde Pierce at all. So it's like, well, why are you giving him a chance to lie even, or to cover his ass?
Like giving him a heads
up. Just go straight to your superiors. I got this in the mail. we got to look at this guy for possible corruption or involvement, some sort of connection to the bank robber. I don't know. And like, it was a lengthier scene than I expected. Like, I kind of just expected him to walk in and show David Hyde Pierce the photo, and maybe like that's the end of it.
Right.
I don't even remember, how did it end exactly? It was sort of, he invites him over to dinner, right?
Yeah. So, well, and that's it. So yeah, so that's what I'm thinking at this point. How did John get the photo?
Mm-hmm.
How did John know Ben Morton? How did John know Ben Morton? Like, why would he send it to Ben Morton?
I guess you could just like look on a website and figure out, okay, what's the chain of command or something like that.
Right.
Maybe these are public officers. They have to be listed.
I guess.
Maybe he does it that way.
But yeah, so
Still.
The invitation to dinner at the end. So at this point, the information that I have is that if he invites Ben Morton over to dinner and Ben goes, that he is going to drug Ben Morton and put makeup on him.
Yep.
And then put him
Send
outside.
on his way.
So yeah, but the ending sort of feels like, oh, Ben, don't accept that invitation. You accepted the invitation, but it's like, but nothing's gonna happen because this guy doesn't seem to actually kill anyone.
He's going to have a bad night, going to go back to work, and it's like, this guy is out of his mind and probably bad.
Yeah. So this is a movie that kind of leaves the rails of its. It kind of like sets up rules and breaks them. It feels like.
Yeah, and I think it's also
Okay.
like it's a good example of looking at endings where sometimes trying to answer questions raises more questions. Where I kind of feel like in some ways, if they had left things a lot more vague, it probably would have been better off, you know?
Sure.
Like if we didn't even have that last little bit with the photograph and you just sort of think that David Hyde Pierce, he's this really crooked cop and this bank robber got away with it. You know, I mean, in some ways to me, like that would have, like it felt a little more like an ending than this other stuff at the very end. So I don't know. I mean, I think there's a lot to kind of unpack and learn from this movie.
Sure.
And clearly it's got its fans. I mean, it's showing up on lists on the internet of great movies that people have never heard of. And I do think there's a lot to enjoy from it. It played Sundance. I think it got a fairly warm reception out of the gate. It's a fun performance to watch from David Hyde Pierce. But, again, it's story problems for me as far as my feelings on this movie and not liking it as much as I wanted to and as much as I liked the opening.
Agreed. And I kind of wonder, you know, so this was made from a short film called The Host by Nick Tomney. And there's a part of me would love to see that. I didn't seek it out. It may be readily available, but I kind of wonder, like watch that and kind of maybe get a better idea of like where this was headed to begin with.
Would there be an easy fix to the complications of David Hyde Pierce's character as far as like what actually he's doing to people and how that relates to being a cop? Like, is there, I kept thinking about that because I was like, well, what is sort of the straighter version of this? Like, is he just out of his mind and a killer and this guy escapes him? Because there's something about that, too, that as much as I like this setup, he literally walks into the hornet's nest, right, John?
Yeah.
Like, you know, as far as, like, these two characters meeting, it's total happenstance. Like, that part of it.
Well, and I guess that is the kind of thing, like, and kind of like what we talked about with Dangerous Curves. You know, a movie that has sort of these ready connections to be made that just aren't made. And like, there's a part of me that wanted it to be like, make it explicitly clear that he definitely kills people, and the people that he kills are criminals. And you know, and it's an offshoot of him being a cop. And so,
totally.
You know, so that way, like, everything's kind of, you know, everything kind of intertwines that way, and might just have a little more weight. And I mean, certainly, you know, if you know he definitely murders people, and it doesn't have to be torture porn. Like, it just has to be like, you're alive one second, you're dead the next, for sure. Because the makeup thing, again, he's a cop. Where does the makeup come in? How does he know how to do makeup that good? But, which honestly...
He's probably arrested some makeup artists.
Yeah. Well, like, as a moment in the movie, it's really interesting.
Yeah.
Like, if everything around that moment fed into that moment and worked, like, I'd be like, whoa, that's really bizarre. Like, to put makeup on this guy and dump him like he's dead, but he's not. Like, that's so crazy. But what's the plan? But yeah, if you kill people, obviously the invitation at the end of the movie would have a lot more weight.
But you know what, though? I don't know. Like, you saying it, I think that would have been so much more interesting if we had known David Hyde Pierce was a cop from the start.
Yes.
He knew this guy was the bank robber. He followed him maybe after the robbery, and instead of taking him to jail, he takes him to his, like, whatever the circumstance is to get him into his house and then do this thing. And this is what he fucking does to criminals who he knows will not get the proper punishment in jail. Like, you know,
right.
And just think, if John knew that this guy was a cop the whole time he was being held hostage, what are you going to do? You're going to call other cops?
Right.
You know, how are you getting out of that situation? You know?
You have no idea how that's going to work. Yeah.
Yeah, this guy's a cop. He can send me to jail. He knows I've done this robbery. But no, he's worse. Like, he's not even doing that. He's holding me hostage and doing this crazy shit to me. And, like, I've got no hope of doing anything to counteract this short of killing him, you know?
Well, and that would be really interesting, too, is, you know, again, when we meet him, we think he could be that dangerous.
Yeah.
And so, and he's posing it being that dangerous. And then when it comes down to it and he really has to do it, like, then it's like really hard, you know, like once that flip happens where it's like, to defend myself, I might have to kill somebody. Like, that's not easy. But the moment in the movie where he grabs the thing off the wall, it seems like incredibly easy for him. But if it was like a struggle for him, and the only other thing I could think of was if David Hyde Pierce's demeanor throughout the entire movie, the character, again, like, you find out he's a cop at the beginning, you know he's a cop, and he's just like this very polite, mannered, milquetoast lieutenant, and maybe his detectives walk all over him, but he's that way the whole way through. Even when he's in complete control, he's never like just this domineering. He's not mean, like, none of that. Like, it would just be he would just keep that demeanor through the whole thing. But it's so creepy that, like, this is how he makes the world right for himself.
Well, and think about how confusing and awful it would kind of be if you're a criminal, you know this guy's a cop, you spend this horrible night with him, and then he lets you go.
Yeah.
Like that, in some ways that's worse because it's like, oh shit, this guy knows I'm out there, and at any moment he can kind of come get me. Like, you know, it's almost like thinking about that movie Murder in Coweta County we watched, where they sort of arranged this guy that they caught, like, they let him go just so they could hunt him down again, you know?
Yeah.
And have an excuse to kill him.
Or sort of a most dangerous game in LA, and I'm keeping that idea. That's my idea, and now that I've trademarked that, I'm going to do that idea now. Sorry.
Well, this was a nice conclusion to this discussion. No, it's a good idea. You should write it. I think that's ripe. I do think, in some ways, that is a layer that may have helped both of us. But hey, maybe not. Maybe not you at home. Maybe you'll sit down and you'll love this thing like a lot of other people did.
It is never a boring movie.
Never a boring movie. It's an hour and a half long. It's an easy watch.
Yeah.
You won't be distracted. It's on Netflix, so you don't even have to pay for it if you're already paying. And it looks really good. I like the look of it. There were times where I'm like, man, David Hyde Pierce, like, he just has this, like, pale demeanor about him where he looks even weirder and crazy in this environment. Yeah. And so I think you should go check that out. We'd love to hear what you think about it. Is there sort of a version of this that I think, you know, would work for you that we didn't think of, that Craig did not trademark, that you could write yourself?
I may have already trademarked it. Actually, I don't. Yeah, trademark. Trademark is the right word, of course.
Yeah, sure.
It's now
you
trademarked
and copyrighted all of this.
Shawn, I actually trademarked you too. I meant
Jesus
to
Christ.
tell you.
Okay.
I just put it in the papers.
Well, I don't know what I'm legally allowed to say then. Going forward.
You're all right.
Okay. Well, I was just going to say, as always, it's nice to hear from you and hear what you think about these movies if you check them out. And thanks for listening. Whether you check out the movies or not, we try to make it so that you can feel like you've seen it, even if you don't want to. Craig.
Yeah.
Next week, I think are going to talk about an exciting experience that it sounds like you're going to have watching Dunkirk. And I don't know if we want to spoil anything beyond that.
Yeah, I don't know how much more we can say. There's a part of me that feels like, you know,
especially if it doesn't
a hurricane might come through and just blow everybody away. So I'm just keeping my fingers crossed right now.
We do
We'll see
know
what
it
happens.
won't happen. Yeah, it won't happen in Silver Springs. It will happen in Silver
Shawn.
Spring. Yeah, we're not going down that road again. But hey, yeah, that's all stuff that we talked about in the mini episodes. If you haven't caught up on all of those, have fun with those. And check out our Facebook page because we, again, are going to be hosting some awesome analysis and write-ups about movies that we definitely have not heard of. From Damian Leahy, filmmaker and friend of the show and all-around smart-ass dude. So you're going to want to read those and digest them and write love letters to him, I think.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. And that is not trademarked. So run with it.
Yeah.
Craig, last
Free
words?
for use. Don't spit into the wind, Shawn.
That's nice to know. Wish you would have told me that yesterday.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, guys. Bye.